Yes. Our next class is going to be dealing with the intersectionality of race, gender, and sexuality. We're going to be doing more in that topic. So I want to focus a little bit more on sexual identity and development when it comes to um, human growth and development and lifespan development. I think this is a topic that don't thoroughly get covered. And one of the things I'm really excited about that we have some guest speakers coming in, and they're going to give their personal narrative. So, being a person that's not in the community, I think is very important as a learning process for all of us to learn from their narrative. Okay, so this is going to be just a brief lecture video on the sexual identity models as far as coming out. Okay, and like I said, it's going to be brief, and hopefully you'll have a little bit of an understanding before the guests come in and speak, and then it might help us with our understanding of some of the things that they're going through, and it might also help us formulate some questions that we need to ask, because I think one of the most important things is that as counselors, that we learn to deal with our biases and put aside our biases, whether our biases deal with race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, as they call it. Sometimes in the past they would call sexual preference, and it's like a lot of leaders in the LGBT community have pushed back against that concept of sexual preference, because it kind of implies that it's a choice that they made in their life. So I think it's very important as clinicians and school counselors that we get away from that framing of the LGBT community of sexual preference. Okay, so what I'm going to briefly do is do a little talk about the coming out process, and hopefully our guests that's coming in are going to get more in detail in their narratives about what it was like for them as they were growing up, and then they made the decision to actually, make it public that they came out. So, in these models, it's very important to understand that um, they are very fluid. Okay, it's like a spectrum. So it's like you might not actually get to where it's going to be one size fits all. Okay, so real quickly, I'm going to go over some of the things in these models. Okay, when it comes to the Falco model was proposed in 1991, and it was a generalized model for sexual identity development of lesbians. And let me go over the different stages. And in the first stage, a person is aware of being different and begins to wonder why. Okay. In the second stage, the person begins to acknowledge her lesbian feelings, and may start beginning telling others that are closer to them. Okay. In the third stage, sexual experimentation start happening. The person explores same-sex relationships while seeking a supportive community. And one of the things that you'll find in all these models is for them to have a sense of belonging to a community. And she begins to learn to function in a same-sex relationship, establishing her place in what they call lesbian culture, and while passing as heterosexual when necessary. And in the final stage, she integrates her private and social identities to become one. And then that's the stage where she becomes comfortable with who she is. And it's like she really makes it public. Okay. If you look at this model, one of the important things is that the stages go through, and it really focuses on lesbians coming out as far as that. So it's like the thing is the Falcon model was focused on that, while the Tridon model, the Tridon model was a 4-stage model of lesbians and gay identity development. And one of the things that's very important is this was coming out. So, real quickly, let's go over those 4 stages. Stage one, or step one, is what's called sensitization, right? And during this stage, um, it usually occurs just before puberty, and most lesbians or gay men do not see homosexuality as personally relevant. They assume somewhat, they assume a sense of heterosexuality, and they think that their sexual status is that. Lesbians and gay men typically acquire social experiences during their childhood. However, as life goes on, they are starting perceiving homosexuality in a more relevant and personal terms. They start to understand that their sexuality is starting to develop a little bit, not with the heterosexism norms. Okay, and these experiences lend support to emergent uh, perceptions of homosexuality. And then in stage two is the identity confusion stage. And in this stage, they begin to perceive their sexual orientation during adolescence, and they reflect on the possibility that their feelings and behaviors, or both, could be regarded as homosexual, which contradicts previously held self-images. Because, like I said, in the previous stages, they looked at themselves as heterosexual, but it's like when identity confusion come on, they start realizing that they're starting to have feelings of affection toward individuals of the same sex. So the hallmark of this stage is identity confusion and inner turmoil and surrounding ambiguous sexual status. They're not exactly, identifying as heterosexual, but they're not identifying as homosexual either. So it's very ambiguous, and their sexual identity is in limbo, and these individuals can uh, they no longer accept exclusive heterosexual identity as a given, yet they have not developed perception of themselves as quite being homosexual or gay. I hate the word homosexual; it sounds so clinical, but they haven't accepted and identified themselves as being gay. So during that stage, um, the individual usually typically will report to identity confusion in different ways. And it's usually like 4 different ways. So I can talk about them real quickly. The first one is denial. They're denying that their feelings of same-sex relationships and fantasies and activities, that just put them as far as denial, that's not happening. Repair, and in repair, they'll attempt to eradicate these feelings of affection and attraction towards same sex. And avoidance, they'll recognize that their behaviors and their thoughts and fantasies are of same sex and gay. And what they'll do is they'll try to avoid them, and they look at them as unacceptable. They'll see them as unacceptable themselves because of the morality that usually society has put on them and on same-sex relationships. And redefining, what they do is in this identity confusion way, is that they'll reduce the identity confusion by redefining behaviors and feelings and activities to not to identify them as being gay or of same sex, but they'll redefine them as, well, um, that's that's just normal. That's just normal process. I'm not, it's kind of like going back into denial. I'm not. This is not happening. And then acceptance is when the person accept their behaviors, they accept that their feelings and fantasies may be gay, homosexual, if you want to call it that. I'm lost of words and terms, but um, they seek out additional sources and information on so they can feel comfortable on who they are because they start to become accepting of who they are. So with the third stage of identity assumption, the lesbian or gay person, um, usually right after adolescence, what they'll do is they'll develop a sense of identity that becomes both a self identity and a presented identity, where they become more congruent, and they at least to they become congruent to when they're when they seen by other people in the community. So it's not like they are just trying to. I know I'm not part of the community, but I've heard of a term called beards. They're not trying to perpetrate and trying to pretend that there's something that they're not, and it becomes congruent, and it becomes it's like immediately in the community it becomes known, and they start you know doing things to become congruent with who they are, and people in the community can recognize this. They start to find themselves as a person in the community, whether it's lesbian or gay man, and they present themselves as such, and they identify and they have a disclosure of what the world terms, I guess, is coming out, to where they'll publicly admit that they are gay, that they are lesbian, so they'll publicly admit this, and they start having a more identity tolerance and acceptance of who they are and other people that are in the community. They won't have this internalized self-hate anymore. They'll start becoming accepted. And then the final stage is the stage 4, what's called commitment, and is the LGBT community. Homosexuality becomes adopted way of life for them. Okay. The main characteristics of the stage include self-acceptance, comfortability of who they are, comfortability of their identity as far as being in the LGBT community, and their role. Okay. So that's briefly the identity models um, that is somewhat popular, um, and is like, I think they're building off of the cast model, which is probably the most popular. But the two models I kind of discussed here kind of gives you an idea of identity development when it comes to um, the LGBT community. So I look forward to our guests this upcoming week, and hopefully we'll be able to have some very good and mature conversations. All right, thank you.